Welcome to In Such a Time, conversations on Jewish life, leadership, and meaning. Each week, Rabbis Jonathan Jaffe and Liora Landi explore the moments, questions, and ideas that shape who we are and who we aspire to be. And now for this week's conversation.
Welcome back to In Such a Time podcast. And this week, Rabbi, we are coming out as we're recording here of Shabbat Chazon, which is the Shabbat that immediately precedes Tisha B'Av, which we talked about in last week's podcast. And Shabbat Chazon, or Shabbat of Vision, is one of a vision of Jerusalem's destruction and the incoming danger of Tisha B'Av. And something that I wanted to bring up and we've discussed since is trying to locate the place of anger within our own Jewish values and whether or not there is a right amount of anger that we should be turning towards within our tradition. So let me just read for you and for the listener just a moment some of the Haftarah that we read from Shabbat Chazon. This is from Yeshayahu, from Isaiah chapter 1. Isaiah says to the people in voicing God's feelings, "Your land is waste, your cities burnt down. Before your eyes, the yield of your soil is consumed by strangers. What need have I for all of your sacrifices? I am sated, I am full. Incense is offensive to me. All of your new moons, your seasons, they fill me with loathing." And talks about the land vomiting out the people. And so in reading this, clearly Isaiah is demonstrating anger and this demonstrating God's anger. And if we are supposed to be made B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, and imitatio Deo, that we are supposed to be trying to emulate God, then as opposed to other faith traditions, is there such a thing as righteous anger?
Well, I think being human is living with the whole spectrum of emotions. And one of the things that I've been learning about lately is, you're going to have your feelings and you don't necessarily control your feelings, but what you can do is control your response to your feelings and to your emotions. And I think a lot about this when we read the parts of the Tanakh that show God as a vengeful and angry God. It's very refreshing to me that we don't try to portray our God as perfect, because I see anger as being a crack in perfection. I see it as being the inability to perhaps control wholeness, and there's fracture, and the fracture is where anger comes out. And to me, that's really quite a relief, because it shows that even God, I'm not saying God's imperfect, but even our image of what God is not without its cracks and its struggles. And so I'm always inspired by that version of what God is. I'm a human. I get angry. I get angry a lot. And I think that what's so interesting about what our tradition teaches us about anger is that when you get angry, you could rupture and destroy an entire world, but you also have the opportunity to pause, start over, calm down. So I think that there are times where anger is for a righteous cause. So those are two different things. If you're angry for the sake of being angry because that's your only disposition, I think that's a problem. If you're angry because you have a reason to be angry, you need to be angry, and anger pushes you in a direction, I think that's something else. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, first of all, as we're recording this podcast, I'm getting angry at the dump truck outside empties all of our garbage. I guess the question that I'm really asking here is anger indeed a blemish, or is it part of righteousness? That is, I think about the Christian ethic of turning the other cheek, and I think of the idea of God as portrayed in the Christian New Testament, and it's one that is beyond anger, that who a God that is always compassionate, even in the face of insult and attack. I think about a Buddhist perspective and the idea that anger is ultimately pervasive and corrosive, and that we should be calming ourselves and never to feel anger. And I'm not sure that that's the same as within our own Jewish text, that not only is God portrayed as seething with anger, but heroes that we look up to are the Avot, the Imahot, our ancestors. Moses, certainly, there is anger that pulsates throughout many parts of the Hebrew Bible. And this is part of my teacher, Devorah Weisberg, liked to say that the other scriptures are prescriptive of what a perfect world should look like, and the Torah is descriptive of what we actually look like. But is there a right amount of anger to be that, and is the answer anything other than no, than zero anger?
Well, I mean, I think that the models that we have in our tradition about what you do in a moment of unrighteousness or lack of justice or lack of creating harmony in the world is that the prophets rebuke the people and they come out with anger and they lash out at the people for not listening to God's words and not being in alignment with the covenant. And so I think anger is sometimes a tool that is used, at least biblically, to show a lack of alignment. And how do we get back on board? Like, it's to push you in a direction. I think, I'll give an example from my real life. I tried to be a calm parent. I don't think that my kids would always say I'm the calmest parent. But when I've asked you 4 times to sit down at the table and you're squirming in your seat, I might on the 5th time raise my voice a little, and that time is going to be the one that's heard.
Yeah.
And I think that that's also sometimes where anger comes from. It's this needs to happen, or there needs to be change, or I know that something can be better, and it's a frustration that erupts. And I think that anger is very powerful. If you've ever been angry, it's an incredibly powerful feeling. Like, you have so much fire in your hand. Like, what do you do with it? But just like with any power and anything that's that has any amount of like fuel behind it, it can also be eruptive and dangerous.
Let me give a historical example. So
Please.
about a century ago, I'm sure you're well aware of the case of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire,
Of course.
in which in the garment district there was an awful fire because there were no protections whatsoever and there were no fire escapes, and hundreds of people died, almost all of them young Jewish women working in these sweatshop-like conditions. And there erupted a deep anger, a outrage at what had happened and the lives lost. And that was really led to the beginning of really of all these protective measures and unions arising. And this was, if there wasn't a seething anger at what had happened, if the people at the time just said, oh, well, we should forgive the people who allow these conditions to happen, I don't know without the indignation if the change would have happened. And so this is what I mean by, should we be always warding off our anger? Or you use an example of a parent. If you of a parent have never once ever gotten angry at your kids, is that to the kids' benefit or is it ultimately to their detriment? If there are no boundaries whatsoever, and that whatever happens, that the parent is always smiling happily at their children, right? That then, like, that's not right. There is in parenting a time and place for anger. Now, it shouldn't be abusive. It shouldn't be something where the child is fearing their safety, but that there is the right amount of anger for the situation. And that's a very different thing, saying that all anger is always bad.
I'm certainly not saying that. I think that anger just needs to be kept in check. And, our tradition gives space for this discussion. And in the Talmud, it says, whoever tears their garments in anger, breaks vessels in anger, let them be in your eyes as one who worships idols. Like, you can't, so anger serves a place and it serves a purpose, but you can't allow anger to corrupt your life. You can't allow it to be your identity. You can't allow it to be the only thing that exists within you. And I think that that is something that people who have anger sometimes feel, that it's just all encompassing.
But the Talmudic example that you share here is one in which anger is manifested in physical acts of violence. So in the example of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, that anger did not result in that, resulted instead in measures in order to protect people in the future. So the anger is the emotion that can lead to violence. And I think the Talmud there talks about this manifestations in violent ways. One should never hit their child, but I think it's okay for a child to know that they have upset their parent and that they're on shaky ground with them.
Yes, I
Right?
agree with you.
Or let me say it a different way. In the Moreh Nevuchim, in the Guide for the Perplexed, Maimonides talks about achieving a golden mean, and he takes this right from Aristotle. Talks about that, you shouldn't eat too much, you shouldn't eat too little. You shouldn't exercise too much, you shouldn't exercise too little. You shouldn't copulate too much, you would say, and copulate too little. That there's always the right amount right in the middle. So you would
should
say
lead
there
your
could be
life
the
in
right,
moderation.
yeah, which works and doesn't work. You would never say you should murder just the right amount. You should rape just the right amount. I mean,
There's right and there's wrong, and then the rest of it, you need to figure out the balance.
which bucket does anger go into? Does anger go into the moderation and there is the right amount of anger, and too little anger is just as bad as too much anger? Or is this in the separate category like murder, in which there is no right amount? And I think that I'm trying to say is that I think that the Christian answer to this would be the latter, would be to say there is no productive amount of anger, that anger is always corruptive. Whereas I think the Jewish response is much more to say, no, there actually is righteous anger. There's no such thing as righteous violence, I guess, unless you are, if it's in self-defense. Moses' first act is one seen as righteous violence in striking down the slave master who's abusing the slave.
I think that a lot of you would say that that people defend their actions and say it's violence for a righteous cause.
When you stand before the Bima on Yom Kippur and there's this moment of atonement, do you atone for moments of anger, and do you ask God for help to empty yourself of anger?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah, anger for sure. I mean, anger is something that I think it might also be different for men and women.
Tell me, I was saying there's a threat. There's always threat to genderize this conversation. What do you think?
But I do think that, women have been taught to live in polite society and be quiet and respectful and demure in a lot of ways. And the last century has been a moment of women becoming vocal and having rage for the sake of the feminist cause, so women could have power, can move forward. And I think it's taken women very far. But I also believe that, like, there's something empowering about a woman who knows how to speak up and to maybe show her anger, because that wasn't something that was ever really allowed. And so I when I'm thinking about my own behavior, there's moments where I'm angry and I'm really proud of my frustration and my anger and my ability to speak up and my ability to be angry and not apathetic about something, and to be passionate. And other times I'm embarrassed by my anger, displaced, disrespectful. The person who received my anger didn't deserve it. Why couldn't I control myself? I mean, I'm human, so I'm always thinking about, how do I live life in a way that's better for the people around me? How do I live life in a way that's respectful to myself? How do I live life in a way that gets me to where I want to be in my life and living in a harmonious, peaceful, loving, beautiful life?
It's interesting. I actually think that I'm the polar opposite. I run a greater risk of not showing enough anger rather than showing too much. Overall, I'm not a particularly angry guy. I'm a pretty happy guy. I think you know that about me. But I am much more likely to, after an encounter, be critical of myself, of saying, why did I just let that go? Why was I passive? Or for me, very often the anger only lands on me following the event and when looking back and trying to understand my emotions on something, I am much more likely to say, I wish I'd shown more anger. I wish I had developed more anger at that time. Then it would be the vice versa.
You know, I think living in Israel taught me to access that. Because it's culturally different.
Yeah.
People are very emotive in
Yeah.
Israel. Did you know that?
Well, this is like the old saying that people in Israel are nice but not polite, and people in America are polite but often not nice,
Right.
or
And
more
so,
or
so
more likely to be not nice.
if you're like at a playground, you just see like parents like lashing out at their kids.
Yes.
And it's not without love. It's
Yes.
not without love. It's with a lot of love, but it's with a fiery Middle Eastern flair to it.
But
And
not abusive, not hitting
not
their kids,
abusive, but
not yes.
the kids at the top of a slide that they were trying to get up, and now the parent has to go to the top of it. Now the parent's like, "How'd you get to the top? Why are you at the top? Why don't I have to get you down? I want
Right.
heels. Can you see it?" You know, like there's like the anchor kind of like
It's
out.
vocalized.
It's vocalized. And I think in some ways Israel is a less. This is not going to come off right,
Yeah.
but in some ways it's less angry because the anger just pours out. Like people heat up and calm down very quickly. I'm not talking about the geopolitics of the country. I'm talking about like the people. And here in America, what I've noticed is I seldomly know if someone's angry here.
So I have a thesis on this. I think that part of the simmering anger in culture such as this is that if you believe that all forms of anger are unproductive and corruptive,
Yeah.
then when you do feel anger, on top of that anger, you will feel guilt and weakness and self-assessment. I'm angry and now I'm mad at myself for giving into this anger.
Yes.
And I think it's much more liberating to say that I'm feeling angry and that anger is justified. And it's not due to personal weakness that I am not calm right now. I just need to make sure to channel this anger in a productive direction. But if your goal, if you feel as though you should always turn the other cheek and that no matter what happens, you should sit, like a Buddhist monk and just have nothing matter.
I don't think those are the same thing. I think
Talk to me.
things can matter and you can still take a deep breath and handle something without the outburst.
Sure. But when someone does something that is meant to anger and to provoke and insult or hurt or abuse, and you let that go because anger is never the answer, then I worry that people begin to then guilt themselves over what is a very understandable, legitimate feeling of anger. And sometimes, again, I'm saying I think that within our tradition, anger can be constructive, and even necessary at times.
There's I think that that's true. There's a piece of liturgy that comes from the Torah that we read on holidays and also in the high holidays, which is about God getting angry, and God gets angry and calls the people of Israel stiff-necked people. Like,
Yes.
these people, they're so stiff-necked. I'm gonna ruin them. I'm gonna destroy them. And Moses learns that to appease God's anger, Moses has to repeat this formula to God, these 13 attributes of God. Remember, you're merciful, you're wonderful,
Right.
you're loving, you protect us. I'm getting this all wrong, but
And then
okay.
we recite the exact same thing on
Right.
holidays, Yom Kippur.
And I've thought about that so much over the years, that the way that we appease God's anger is to placate, which is scary, but then that placating is a reminder of what we're supposed to be. So we need to make sure to calm God down. I'm talking about the character of God, or however you believe in this version. We need to calm God down. Then after we've calmed God down, we have to remind ourselves that we have to abide by these 13 attributes of faith and 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 trying to remove the anger from our hearts. And I also think about that because anger is powerful for the person who is angry, but it's very scary for the person who's the recipient of that anger.
Right.
And I think that that's a model that is both so moving to me that, like, wow, we have this formula to help God calm down, but oh, that's upsetting that we have to try to calm God down.
Right. There's this idea that God, I know within Kabbalah, there's idea that God rests between justice and mercy, between mishpat, right, with rachamim, and that it is our job through our prayers to try to move God from justice more towards mercy. But there should never be no mishpat. It's never meant to be all mercy. That sometimes a little bit less merciful is what the day calls for. Um, Moving away, I think we can be very like anthropomorphic with our idea of God and saying that, God gets angry. If we turn towards more modern models, let's say someone like Mordechai Kaplan, the founder of Reconstructionist Judaism, would say that God is really just a symbol for all of the values that we hold most dear and close to ourselves, or we project those values outwards in order to then frame and steer towards those.
Okay.
So God is merciful, God is righteous, God is wise, God, right? All these things, they're all things that we want to do. We don't pray to God and God has a stub toe because we don't want stub toes. We pray to God for all the things that we want. And so if the Jewish conception of God includes anger, then it almost, in a Kaplanian sense, is that anger is part of the totality of what we should be steering towards. And that's a very different idea from some of those other faith traditions that I'm mentioning, that we want to have the kind of anger that moves us towards justice, the kind of anger that when Abraham calls out to God at Sodom and Gomorrah and says, "Will the Lord of justice not act righteously, not act justly?" That is a chutzpahdik thing to say, and Abraham is angry at God. Like, how could you kill innocent people? How could I follow a God who does that? That is a righteous anger that I think we should celebrate and platform. We should highlight.
Like, yes. And I also think that, we're living in a very angry moment, and an angry moment amongst all people. Like, I feel like people have discovered, maybe after COVID,
Mhm.
emotions were kept inside for a long time, and
I
we're
think social media whips up anger.
right. And we're dealing with the repercussions of just a whole cluster of a whole cluster of really, really divisive and scary things, which are all coming together at this moment. And I think that one of the reasons that, and we've talked about this a little bit before, but one of the reasons that all of these social justice movements have been so successful, whether it's the Free Palestine movement or it's, um, Jews coming out for Israel and marching in the streets, and people, I think, feel anger and want to place that anger somewhere productive. They want to give their anger meaning and say, I'm doing this for a cause. I'm doing this because I believe in something. I'm doing this not just because I have anger in my heart and I don't know what to do with it, but I'm doing it for the plight of others. I'm doing it for my own people. I'm doing it for Israel. I'm doing it against Israel. I'm doing it for the Jews, whatever it is. And I think that people really need to acknowledge that and be aware of that everybody just kind of wants to let it out somewhere. And what do we do? What do we do with it?
Again, I think first of all, I have to say, of course, that your example of the Free Palestine movement, I don't know what you deem successful. I don't know that that's been very successful in terms of changing the quality of life for any given Palestinian. I think that it's successful in terms of terrifying Jews on university campuses.
Successful in the numbers that come out for it. I think it's successful in the way
whips up
that
a frenzy.
Yeah, it's that it's just gotten traction in every possible way.
But
yeah,
again,
that's what I mean.
I differentiate this whole time between the anger and how is it manifested into action, and can there be a virtuous action that comes out of anger, like the union movement? Again, I'm using out of that, or parenting and teaching your child a valuable lesson going forward. That I think that these days, I think that part of the issue is that a lot of the social norms have broken down, and things that used to be embarrassing to say out loud are no longer embarrassing to say out loud, and embarrassing to do are no longer embarrassing to do. out loud, and that there's been this fraying of sort of the fabric of society of what should we expect of one another. And for me, that's less to do with the anger, which I think has always been there, but our ability to channel that, either to manage that anger or to channel that anger towards a positive outcome. I'll give you an example
Yeah,
here.
please.
We've all been at the airport and watched the person at the gate just scream at the service agent
Yeah.
who has nothing to do with why the plane is canceled or being repaired or such, and is not doing anything constructive other than verbally abusing someone
Yeah.
who they feel like they can take their anger out on. I think we see a lot of that in society these days, and I don't think that's anything that we should be lifting up as sort of any sort of, sacred value. But the person who gets angry about it and then seeks to create a different system by which, someone changes or starts a new company around app and customer service, or seeks to like help to get a new plane or such. I think that what we're seeing today is, with this fraying of societal norms, there is nothing holding in the physical manifestations of this anger. It's just out there all over the place, and it is not particularly constructive. It's just rage. And here, let me say one more thing. I think that that's the key point for me, is I think that there is a difference between anger and rage. I think the Torah portrays a positive value to anger and an angry God, but not a raging out of control God. Not like I'll make the point. I'll make the case you can push back. Not the God like the person at the service desk at the airport taking all of their anger out on the poor service agent.
I think the character of God learns to be a little bit less rageful and a little bit more angry. I think that there's a character development throughout the Torah of rage into constructive anger. And I think that one of the reasons that the prophets are often so angry and sometimes go into rage is because they're not being listened to. It is righteous. It is righteous anger. It's for a cause. It's for,
And they're trying to help someone.
yes. And I think that that's often where anger comes from. You think you're doing something constructive. You know better.
Especially, we can, as parents, this is the seed of our anger, is that we are trying to help our children. And when they don't listen to us and don't take any of our advice, they're going to do things the hard way. It's going to make it worse for both of us. But ultimately, we're coming from a positive, motivation.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that I think that this is actually a really interesting question to go into the high holidays with.
Yeah.
I try to give myself maybe like one intention for every high holidays. Sometimes it's emotion, sometimes it's an idea. But I think that where does anger belong in our tradition, and where does it belong in our lives, and what kind of power does it hold? And how do do we contain it, or are we contained by it?
In the Amidah, in our central prayer, in the weekday in which there are petitions, there's Ala Rashaim, there's the prayers in which we are asking that the evilness be blotted out.
Yeah.
And there's this famous story from the Talmud in which Bruria, this feminine, scholar of the Talmud, that she sees her husband's being bullied by a bunch of like ruffians in the neighborhood, and he's praying that the Rashim, that they should be blotted out. And she said, no, don't read it as the evil doers should be blotted out, but rather the evil within them. Don't pray for their destruction. Pray for the destruction of the evilness within them. I think that is the difference between rage and anger. Rage is just kill them all. And anger is let what is inside of them that is gnawing on me, or not even that is abusing me, let that be extinguished so that the person can live a better life themselves.
Yeah,
and I think that that's the idea of God in the Torah as well. I think that God is trying to shepherd the people along in the Torah, and there is anger, but is anger always wanting towards the ultimate benefit and a better future for the people?
I mean, the Hasidic tradition teaches us that, anger is a mask, and what's underneath the mask. And, I whenever my kids come home and they tell me about like an angry kid at school, or someone who acted out, or someone who just said something horrible to them, I ask them if they're okay. And then I ask, what do you think they're going through that they're that angry? And I think that when we confront anger, when we experience anger within ourselves or from someone else, I think that, leading with compassion and with a little bit of rachamim, with mercy for that human who's probably suffering, and that's why what's coming out of them is coming out of them in that way. I think that is to be curious about what's in their heart is maybe a way to channel it into something more constructive.
So maybe our goal towards the holidays is to give those from whom we are witnessing anger, to give them the benefit of the doubt that there's something there that they are dealing with themselves, just like the person at the counter at the airline, that there is probably something deeply unsettling within them, deeply hurt within them, right? That whole idea that hurt people, and that we ourselves should try to be understanding even in the face of anger when it rears its head.
Yeah, yeah. And kids still need to sit down at the table.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us on In Such a Time. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. To learn more about Rabbis Jonathan Jaffe and Leora Landi, or to connect with Temple Beth-El of Northern Westchester, visit bethelnw.org, or follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Temple Beth-El NW. Thanks for listening.